Staszyński, rotmistrz Ulanów Poznańskich. Sikorski, porucznik Ulanów Śląskich.
The Colditz story stands as one of the most gripping war films of the 1950s, a testament to the indomitable human spirit in the face of seemingly impossible odds. Yet beneath its taut direction and memorable performances lies a layer of reality that most viewers never fully grasp. The film that brought the legendary escapes from Nazi Germany's supposedly escape-proof prison to life harbors secrets far more compelling than the fiction it portrays. What if I told you that the actors who brought these daring POWs to life were themselves veterans of the very war they were depicting? Or that the film's most iconic scenes were quietly shaped by men who had actually lived through the harrowing experiences of Colditz Castle? The truth behind this classic war film goes far deeper than most fans realize. Let's pull back the curtain on this landmark film and explore the shadows behind its creation. The personal sacrifices, the untold stories, and the remarkable confluence of truth and dramatization that makes the Colditz story far more significant than just another war picture. The revelations that follow will forever change how you view this classic film, exposing the hidden truths that the cast and crew have kept quiet for decades. The Colditz story wasn't just another war film. It was a living document of recent history, released barely a decade after World War II ended. Based on the best-selling memoir by P.R. Reed, it chronicled the audacious escape attempts from Oflag Fjordse, the medieval castle repurposed by the Nazis as a high-security prison for Allied officers who had already attempted to escape from other camps. Directed by Guy Hamilton in 1955, the film arrived at a pivotal moment in British cinema. The nation was still processing the aftermath of a devastating global conflict, while simultaneously dealing with the loss of empire and a changing world order. Rather than approaching the subject with grim solemnity, Hamilton chose a different path, highlighting the ingenuity, humor, and unbreakable spirit of the prisoners. This tonal choice wasn't just artistic. It reflected the actual attitudes of many Colditz survivors, who maintained that their sanity depended on humor and purpose in the face of captivity. What few viewers realize is that the production team had unprecedented access to the real escapees. P.R. Reed himself served as a technical advisor, along with several other former Colditz prisoners. Their insights shaped everything from the set design to the dialogue, lending the film an authenticity that transcended its modest budget. The Colditz Castle shown in the film wasn't actually Colditz at all, but rather Stirling Castle in Scotland, a practical choice that nonetheless created unintended resonance. Both fortresses stand as symbols of national resilience, perched atop imposing heights, their walls having witnessed centuries of conflict and defiance. But the most remarkable aspect of the production was hiding in plain sight. The cast itself harbored veterans who had faced the enemy on the battlefield and experienced captivity firsthand. Their performances weren't merely acting. They were informed by lived experience in ways that audiences of the time would have immediately recognized, but which modern viewers often miss entirely. John Mills, who portrayed the film's protagonist P.R. Reed, had served as a lieutenant in the Royal Engineers during the war, though he was never captured. His military bearing wasn't affected. It was authentic. Mills brought to the role not just his considerable acting talents, but also an innate understanding of the officer-class mentality that defined Colditz. The quiet authority he projected on screen came from having commanded men in real life, not merely from studying the part. In 1942, John Mills had been released from military service specifically to star in war films that would boost British morale. His understanding of military protocol was so precise that other actors often deferred to him on set when questions of authenticity arose. But it was Eric Portman's performance as Colonel Richmond that held the most fascinating duality. His stern, by-the-book character serves as both antagonist and reluctant hero in the film. What audiences didn't know was that Portman had narrowly avoided military service due to his poor eyesight, a fact that haunted him throughout the war years. Friends reported that his meticulous preparation for the role of Richmond stemmed partly from his desire to understand the experience he had missed. The rigid adherence to military protocol that his character displays wasn't just dramatic choice. It was Portman's way of paying respect to the men who had served when he could not. Perhaps most remarkable was the presence of Lionel Jeffries, playing the role of the resourceful POW. Jeffries had actually served in the Far East during the war and had been present at the liberation of Japanese prison camps. The premature baldness that became his trademark as an actor was reportedly accelerated by the harsh conditions he endured during military service. When depicting the privations of prison life, Jeffries wasn't imagining. He was remembering. Beneath the sometimes light-hearted tone of the film ran an undercurrent of authentic military experience that most modern viewers completely miss. These weren't merely actors playing soldiers. They were men who had lived through the global conflict that had shaped the century, now recounting a version of it for posterity. The strain of maintaining professional distance from material that hit so close to home created a tension on set that the director later claimed gave the film its emotional backbone. As filming progressed, the weight of responsibility to tell this story truthfully became increasingly apparent. These weren't fictional characters they were portraying. They were real men, many still alive, whose courage in captivity had become legendary. And that's where the production faced its first major challenge. The pivotal choice that would define the Colditz story came early in production and involved a fundamental question: how to depict the enemy. The original screenplay drafted a cartoonish portrayal of the German guards, exaggerated villains with monocles and clicking heels. It would have been an easy choice, playing to lingering post-war sentiment. But it was the real P.R. Reed who intervened, insisting on a more nuanced portrayal. "That's not how it was," Reed reportedly told director Guy Hamilton. "The Germans at Colditz were professionals doing a job. Some were decent men. Making them caricatures dishonors what we actually accomplished." This intervention led to a complete rewrite of how the German characters were portrayed. In the finished film, the camp commandant and his officers are shown as military professionals, strict but largely fair within their understanding of the rules of war. This decision transformed the narrative from a simple heroes versus villains tale into something far more complex. A chess match between worthy opponents, each bound by duty and circumstance. The actor, Anton Diffring, who played a German officer in the film, had actually fled Nazi Germany in 1939 due to his Jewish heritage. His performance was informed by the complex understanding of a man who had seen German militarism from both sides. Hamilton later admitted that the commercial instinct would have been to demonize the enemy, particularly in a film made so soon after the war. Marketing had pushed for more hissable villains. But Reed's insistence on accuracy created a film that stood apart from other war pictures of the era. Instead of focusing on hatred of the enemy, it celebrated the ingenuity and resilience of the prisoners. This authenticity extended to the escape scenes themselves. The initial screenplay contained spectacular but entirely fictional breakout sequences, men swinging from ropes over walls, dramatic shootouts, and Hollywood-style action. Again, the real Colditz veterans vetoed these additions. The actual escapes had been triumphs of patience, planning, and attention to detail, not action spectaculars. The famous Franz Josef escape depicted in the film, where prisoners disguised as German officers simply walked out the front gate, required no gunfire or chases to be extraordinary. Its power came from its audacity and psychological understanding of the enemy. In honoring the methodical reality rather than inventing melodrama, Hamilton created something that resonated more deeply. The tension in the film builds not from wonder at whether the escapes will succeed, but from appreciation of the meticulous planning and iron-willed patience required to execute them. This commitment to authenticity over sensationalism represented a significant financial gamble. War films with more action and less subtlety were proving successful at the box office. But the decision to remain true to the actual experiences of the Colditz prisoners gave the film its enduring power. It's a choice that reverberates through every frame of the finished picture, though few viewers could identify exactly why this war film feels different from its contemporaries. The production's next challenge would prove even more difficult, recreating the physical and psychological reality of captivity in a way audiences could comprehend. Filming the Colditz story exacted an unexpected physical and psychological toll on its cast and crew. Director Guy Hamilton insisted on shooting through a bitter Scottish winter to capture the authentic feel of the castle's cold stone walls and the prisoners' constant battle against the elements. The actors weren't merely pretending to be cold. They were genuinely shivering through many scenes, their breath visible in the frigid air. John Mills later recalled how the production deliberately kept the set uncomfortable. They turned the heat off completely. We wore the same uniforms day after day, just as the real prisoners would have done. By the third week, we all had genuine chilblains and runny noses. I remember thinking, and these poor chaps endured this for years. The decision to film at Stirling Castle created other unintended hardships. The medieval fortress wasn't designed for a film crew, with equipment having to be hauled up narrow stone staircases and through cramped corridors. The logistics of filming in such a space meant long days, technical frustrations, and physical exhaustion. What appears as a seamless environment on screen was actually a patchwork of difficult locations that tested everyone's endurance. During the tunnel excavation scenes, the actors were working in spaces sometimes only 2 feet high. The dirt and clay caking their uniforms wasn't applied by makeup artists. It was real soil they accumulated while crawling through the cramped sets. Several actors reported persistent back problems for months after filming. Perhaps the most demanding aspect was the weight loss required of the actors. To portray prisoners on restricted rations, several cast members were asked to lose significant weight before and during production. Eric Portman reportedly dropped almost 20 pounds to achieve the gaunt, hollow-cheeked look of a long-term prisoner. This physical transformation affected his energy and mood on set, a method acting approach before such techniques became fashionable in British cinema. But the psychological aspects proved even more challenging. Several of the technical advisors, real Colditz veterans, found themselves experiencing unexpected emotional reactions when seeing their experiences recreated. One former prisoner reportedly had to leave the set during the filming of a failed escape attempt, as the scene triggered vivid memories of friends who had been caught and executed. These moments of genuine emotion bled into the performances. Brian Forbes, who played Winslow, described how the mood on set would shift dramatically when former prisoners were watching. You'd see these gentlemen, dignified, proper English officers, with tears in their eyes, and suddenly the responsibility of what we were doing would hit you like a physical blow. We weren't just making entertainment. We were telling their story. The production also faced resistance from unexpected quarters. Some former German officers objected to their portrayal, while certain British military advisors thought the film emphasized escape attempts at the expense of showing the psychological warfare waged daily against captivity itself. Hamilton had to navigate these competing perspectives while maintaining the narrative thrust of the film. Despite these challenges, or perhaps because of them, a remarkable camaraderie developed among the cast. The discomfort and isolation of location shooting created bonds similar to those formed in actual military units. This unplanned method acting produced a chemistry on screen that larger budget war films, with their comfortable studio shoots, often failed to achieve. As difficult as the production was, however, even the most demanding days on set paled in comparison to what the real prisoners had endured. This perspective kept complaints to a minimum and fostered a determination to honor the true story through authentic performances. The true brilliance of the Colditz story lies in subtle details most viewers overlook entirely. These small touches, insisted upon by the former prisoners who advised the production, transform what might have been a standard war film into a masterclass in historical authenticity. Watch closely during scenes in the prisoners' quarters. The men are constantly in motion, mending clothes, playing cards, writing letters, rather than simply sitting idle. This perpetual activity wasn't a director's choice to keep the frame interesting. It accurately reflects how prisoners fought against the psychological damage of captivity. Colditz inmates established routines and projects specifically to maintain sanity and purpose during long years of imprisonment. Idle hands weren't just the devil's workshop, one Colditz veteran explained during production. They were a direct path to breakdown. Notice, too, how the escape committee functions in the film. Their operational security, the careful compartmentalization of information, the need-to-know basis of planning, isn't dramatic invention, but reflects actual military intelligence procedures. John Mills insisted on showing this aspect accurately, pointing out that many Colditz prisoners had been intelligence officers before capture and applied professional tradecraft to their escape planning. The most dedicated Colditz prisoners maintained escape plotting as a full-time occupation, often spending 14-16 hours daily on preparation, reconnaissance, and material gathering. One real prisoner painstakingly collected over 500 feet of thread from various garments over 6 months to create a rope for a planned roof escape. Perhaps the most frequently missed detail concerns language. In the film, certain prisoners serve as interpreters, while others struggle with German. This linguistic reality shaped everything in the actual prison. Escapes often hinged on language skills. Officers who spoke fluent German could attempt certain escape routes that were closed to others. The hierarchy among prisoners was partly determined by who could communicate directly with guards versus who needed translation. The film subtly depicts this reality without ever explicitly addressing it. The carefully cultivated facial hair in the film also tells a story most viewers miss. Notice how some prisoners sport meticulously maintained mustaches, while others appear with strategically grown or shaved beards. This wasn't arbitrary. In preparation for escapes, prisoners would often grow beards, allowing them to dramatically alter their appearance later by shaving into different styles that matched forged identity papers. What appears as personal grooming preference on screen was actually strategic preparation for escape. Most revealing are the mess hall scenes. The careful portioning of food, the ways prisoners protect their meager rations, and the rituals around mealtime all reflect the actual experiences reported by survivors. Food wasn't merely sustenance. It was currency, comfort, and a psychological link to normal life. The way characters in the film respond to food, the reverence with which they approach even poor quality provisions, wasn't acting, but an accurate portrayal of the psychology of captivity. Even the film's pacing contains hidden authenticity. The long stretches where seemingly little happens, punctuated by moments of intense activity, mirror the actual rhythm of prison life described by Colditz survivors. Months of boredom interrupted by moments of terror, as one former prisoner put it. These details combine to create a film that operates on two levels: as an entertaining war picture for casual viewers, and as an almost documentary-level recreation for those who know what to look for. This duality helps explain why the film has endured, while flashier war movies of the same era have faded from memory. Yet behind these authentic details lay conflicts that threaten the very production itself. While the Colditz story depicted solidarity among prisoners on screen, the production itself faced significant behind-the-scenes conflict that nearly derailed the entire project. The fundamental tension arose from competing visions of what the film should be, a tension that mirrored larger questions about how Britain should remember the war. On one side stood producer Daniel Angel and the financial backers, who envisioned a crowd-pleasing adventure film that would capitalize on post-war patriotism. They pushed for more action, more daring-do, and more obvious heroism. On the other side stood director Guy Hamilton, the technical advisors, and several cast members, who fought for a more nuanced depiction that honored the psychological reality of captivity. This conflict manifested in daily battles over the script. Scenes were rewritten on set, sometimes hours before filming, as the two camps struggled for control of the narrative. Hamilton later admitted that he deliberately shot certain scenes in ways that would make the more sensationalist alternatives impossible to create in editing, a guerrilla tactic against his own producers. Guy Hamilton had served in the Royal Navy during WSET and participated in clandestine operations. His wartime experiences made him particularly sensitive to how combat and captivity were portrayed on screen. He reportedly told an executive who was pushing for more action, "You weren't there, I was." The censors presented another battlefield. The British Board of Film Censors expressed concern over the depiction of successful escapes against German captors, worrying it might damage diplomatic relations with West Germany, now becoming an important Cold War ally. Several scenes had to be carefully negotiated to emphasize that the film depicted Nazi Germany, not the current German state. Even the real Colditz veterans disagreed among themselves about how their story should be told. Some pushed for a completely factual account, while others recognized that certain dramatic licenses would make their experiences more accessible to audiences. P.R. Reid himself often served as mediator between these factions, balancing historical accuracy with narrative necessity. The British War Office initially refused cooperation, concerned the film might reveal actual escape methods that remained classified. Only after personal interventions from several high-ranking officers who had been imprisoned at Colditz did the military agree to provide limited technical assistance. Perhaps most surprisingly, there was significant debate over the film's tone. The real Colditz experience had contained moments of genuine humor alongside the hardship, gallows humor that helped prisoners cope with their circumstances. Some production executives considered this inappropriate for a war film, arguing that levity would undermine the heroism being portrayed. Former prisoners vehemently disagreed, insisting that humor had been essential to survival. "They want us to be stone-faced heroes," one veteran reportedly complained. "But that's not how we got through it. If we couldn't laugh, we would have broken." Brian Forbes, who played Winslow, later revealed that several cast members threatened to walk off the production if the authentic psychological aspects were compromised in favor of a more conventional war narrative. This unified stand by actors, many of whom had served during the war, eventually forced the studio to back down on some of their more commercial demands. The film that emerged from these conflicts was inevitably a compromise, but one that leaned more toward authenticity than many productions of its era. The tensions behind the scenes paradoxically contributed to the film's power, creating a work that honored both the factual reality of Colditz and the emotional truth of the prisoner experience. But the most remarkable aspect of the Colditz story production was yet to be revealed, a layer of irony that would only become apparent years after its release. In the most remarkable twist of the Colditz story production, the film omitted what many consider the most extraordinary escape from the actual castle, one so audacious that producers feared audiences would dismiss it as Hollywood fantasy. The glider escape plot, developed in the final months of the war, represented the pinnacle of prisoner ingenuity and engineering prowess. By 1944, a group of British officers at Colditz had designed and were secretly constructing a two-man glider hidden in an attic above the chapel, using only materials they could scavenge: bed slats, floorboards, electrical wire, cotton sheets, and paste made from boiled prison rations. They created a flyable aircraft intended to soar from the castle roof across the River Mulda to freedom. The Colditz glider was being built by Lieutenant Tony Rolt, who would later become a pioneer in the British racing car industry, and Bill Goldfinch, who had been an engineer before the war. Their technical knowledge enabled them to calculate lift ratios, stress factors, and glide paths, using only rudimentary tools and stolen German books. When the technical advisors, former prisoners who had participated in the glider's construction, described this escape plan to the filmmakers, they were met with disbelief. Producer Daniel Angel reportedly dismissed it as too far-fetched and the kind of thing audiences would never accept as true. Even with assurances from multiple eyewitnesses, the producers remained convinced that including the glider would undermine the film's credibility. Guy Hamilton later admitted his own skepticism. "It seemed like something from a boy's adventure story, rather than real life. We were trying to make a film that would be taken seriously, and I feared the glider would push us into fantasy territory." This decision created significant tension with the technical advisors. For men who had spent months on this ambitious escape plan, risking severe punishment if discovered, the omission felt like erasure of their greatest achievement. Several threatened to withdraw their cooperation entirely. Only the intervention of P.R. Reed, who understood the commercial realities of filmmaking, prevented a complete rupture. The irony deepened years later, when a full-scale reproduction of the Colditz glider was actually built using the original plans. In April 2000, a Channel 4 documentary team constructed a replica according to the prisoner's designs and successfully flew it, proving that the escape plan would have worked. The very element dismissed as too incredible for a factual film was demonstrably authentic. This omission represents a fascinating inversion of the usual Hollywood approach. Typically, films exaggerate real events to make them more dramatic or spectacular. In this unique case, reality was deemed too extraordinary for cinema. The actual ingenuity of the Colditz prisoners exceeded what filmmakers believed audiences would accept as true. The decision to exclude the glider stands as a testament to the remarkable resourcefulness of the actual prisoners. Their achievements were so extraordinary that they surpassed the boundaries of what seemed plausible on screen. The glider's absence from the film also speaks to the post-war mood in Britain, a nation somewhat uncomfortable with celebrating ingenuity and individual brilliance, preferring stories of collective stoicism and understated courage. When the Colditz story was released, audiences had no way of knowing they were seeing an incomplete picture, that the most technically impressive escape plan had been deliberately excluded. This knowledge only emerged years later, adding yet another layer to the film's complex relationship with historical truth. But even without the glider, the film achieved something remarkable. It broke through initial audience indifference to become a cultural touchstone, though not in the way anyone involved with its production could have predicted. The Colditz story faced a tepid initial reception that nearly relegated it to obscurity. Opening in January 1955 to modest box office returns and mixed reviews, the film appeared destined to become just another entry in the already crowded genre of war pictures. Critics praised the performances, but questioned whether audiences needed another reminder of the recently concluded conflict. Some reviews dismissed it as too restrained, compared to more action-oriented war films of the period. The film's initial worldwide box office of approximately $157,000 barely covered its production costs of $128,000, considered a commercial disappointment by rank organization standards. Several theater chains reduced its scheduled run after the first week of modest attendance. What the critics and studio executives failed to recognize was that the film's impact would unfold gradually rather than immediately, a pattern oddly appropriate for a story about patience and carefully laid plans. The turning point came through an unexpected channel: television. When the Colditz story received its first television broadcast in 1958, it found the wider audience that had eluded it in theaters. Viewed in living rooms rather than cinema halls, the film's intimate focus on character and psychological detail resonated more effectively. Families who had lived through the war years found themselves discussing their own experiences after watching, often sharing stories with younger generations for the first time. The BBC received such an overwhelming response to this broadcast that they scheduled a repeat showing within months, an unusual step at a time when film rebroadcasts were rare. This television success prompted a limited theatrical re-release that performed substantially better than the original run. But the film's most significant breakthrough came through its influence on other media. In 1972, the BBC launched a television series also titled Colditz, directly inspired by the film. This series, starring David McCallum and Robert Wagner, brought the story to a new generation and reignited interest in the original film. Running for 2 successful seasons, the series prompted yet another theatrical re-release of the 1955 film, which finally achieved the commercial success that had initially eluded it. The film's reputation among military historians and film scholars also grew steadily over the decades. What had once been criticized as too restrained came to be recognized as admirably authentic. In a 1979 survey of British war films conducted by the Imperial War Museum, military veterans consistently rated the Colditz story among the most accurate depictions of service life and the psychology of combat and captivity. John Mills' performance, initially described merely as solid, was later recognized as a masterclass in understated authority. A 1985 retrospective in Sight and Sound magazine singled out his portrayal as the quintessential British officer, determined without being showy, authoritative without being overbearing. This reassessment helped cement Mills's status as one of Britain's finest film actors. Perhaps most significantly, the film became required viewing at military academies throughout NATO countries, used to teach lessons about leadership under duress, psychological resistance, and the ethical obligations of captured personnel. The very qualities that made it commercially challenging in 1955, its psychological depth and refusal to sensationalize, made it invaluable as a training tool for military officers. By the film's 25th anniversary, in 1980, it had completed a remarkable journey from commercial disappointment to cultural institution. A special screening at the Imperial War Museum, attended by surviving Colditz veterans and cast members, marked its elevation to the canon of essential British war films. This delayed recognition echoed the experiences of many veterans, whose wartime contributions went unheralded for years before being properly acknowledged. The film's path from obscurity to acclaim mirrored the shifting attitudes toward the war itself, from immediate post-war exhaustion to thoughtful historical appreciation. But the Colditz story wasn't finished leaving its mark on British culture. Its most profound impact would emerge in unexpected ways that continue to reverberate today. The cultural footprint of the Colditz story extends far beyond cinema, infiltrating British society in ways both obvious and subtle. Perhaps its most visible legacy was the explosion of interest in escape narratives that followed the film's television broadcasts, creating an entire subgenre of war literature and entertainment. Publishers reported a significant increase in memoirs and historical accounts of POW experiences after the film gained popularity. P.R. Reid's original book, which had been a modest success upon its initial publication, was reprinted numerous times and eventually sold over 2 million copies. This renewed interest prompted other Colditz veterans to publish their own accounts, creating a rich historical record that might otherwise have remained untold. The film's influence extended to unexpected areas of British culture. In 1970, Parker Brothers released Escape from Colditz, a board game designed by Colditz escapee Major Pat Reid himself, along with game designer Brian Degas. The game became one of the best-selling British board games of the 1970s, introducing the Colditz story to yet another generation. Its combination of strategy and historical accuracy made it a favorite in family homes across the UK and beyond. The Escape from Colditz board game sold over 500,000 copies in its first 2 years of release, and has been in almost continuous production since, with collectors now paying hundreds of pounds for original 1970s editions. A 2016 60th anniversary edition was released to significant commercial success, demonstrating the enduring appeal of the Colditz narrative. The vocabulary and imagery from the film seeped into British institutional life in subtle ways. The term Colditz mentality, inspired by the film's depiction of resourcefulness under constraint, entered corporate language to describe creative problem-solving with limited resources. Management consultants in the 1980s and 1990s sometimes used clips from the film to illustrate teamwork and strategic thinking in adverse circumstances. More significantly, the film's unromantic portrayal of captivity influenced how subsequent generations understood wartime experience. Before the Colditz story, popular culture often depicted POW life as either unrelenting torture or relatively comfortable confinement. The film's nuanced approach, showing the psychological toll of captivity alongside moments of camaraderie and even humor, provided a template for a more authentic understanding of the prisoner experience. Military training programs incorporated lessons from the film's depiction of prisoner organization and resistance. The character-driven leadership style of John Mills's Pat Reid character, leading by example rather than mere authority, became a reference point in British military academies' discussions of officer conduct under duress. Perhaps most poignantly, the film became a vehicle for veterans to discuss their own experiences. Family members of former POWs frequently reported that watching the film together was the first time their fathers or grandfathers opened up about their wartime captivity. The film's restrained emotional palette made it safer for veterans to engage with memories they had often kept suppressed. The psychological insights embedded in the film influenced later therapeutic approaches to captivity trauma. The depiction of how prisoners maintained mental health through structure, purpose, and community became a reference point for researchers studying resilience under extreme conditions. When British military psychologists developed protocols for preparing personnel for potential capture in later conflicts, they drew partly on observations gleaned from the Colditz story and the memoirs it popularized. In education, the film became a staple of history classrooms, valued for depicting aspects of the war beyond combat, the daily resistance of captured servicemen, and the battle of wills between captors and prisoners. For many British schoolchildren from the 1960s onward, their first substantial understanding of World War II came not through battles and campaigns, but through the microcosm of Colditz Castle, as portrayed in this film. The castle itself transformed from an obscure historical footnote to a major tourist destination, with visitors specifically seeking out the locations depicted in the film. After German reunification, Colditz Castle was restored and opened as a museum, drawing thousands of visitors annually, many explicitly citing the film as their introduction to the story. What began as a modestly budgeted war film had become a cultural reference point that shaped how generations of Britons understood aspects of their national character: resourcefulness, understated courage, and dry humor in the face of adversity. The enduring power of the Colditz story ultimately rests on a profound truth that transcends its specific historical moment. The film isn't really about escape at all. Behind the tunnel digging and fence cutting lies a deeper narrative about maintaining humanity in dehumanizing circumstances, a universal theme that explains why the film continues to resonate with audiences who have no direct connection to World War II. The real Colditz veterans consistently emphasized this point in later interviews. Their escapes weren't merely about returning to the fight or evading captivity. They were acts of psychological resistance, assertions of identity and agency in an environment designed to strip both away. The meticulous planning of escapes provided purpose. The execution provided hope. Even the failures provided lessons that strengthened resolve for next attempts. Every minute spent planning was a minute we weren't prisoners in our own minds, one Colditz veteran explained decades after the war. The Germans controlled our bodies, but never our imaginations. This psychological truth pulses beneath the surface of every frame of the film, largely because the actors themselves came to understand it during production. The physical discomforts of the shoot, the cold, the confined spaces, the long hours, gave them a small taste of the conditions they were portraying. Several cast members later described experiencing genuine claustrophobia during tunnel scenes that translated into authentic anxiety on screen. John Mills revealed in a 1985 interview that during one particularly confined tunnel sequence, he experienced a panic attack that required filming to be briefly halted. Rather than hiding this vulnerability, he incorporated it into his performance, using the genuine fear to inform his portrayal of the psychological pressure faced by escapees. The most remarkable achievement of the Colditz story is how it balances seemingly contradictory truths. It celebrates the daring of the escape attempts while simultaneously revealing their deeper purpose as acts of psychological survival. It acknowledges the terror of captivity while showing how humor and camaraderie could coexist with that fear. It portrays heroism without resorting to caricature. This complexity explains why the film has aged so much better than many of its contemporaries. While other war films from the same period often feel dated in their nationalism or simplistic moral frameworks, the Colditz story explores human reactions to adversity in ways that remain relevant, regardless of the specific historical context. Veterans of subsequent conflicts, from Vietnam to the Falklands to Iraq, have reported finding unexpected resonance in this film about a war that preceded their own. The psychology of captivity, the importance of maintaining routine and purpose in chaotic circumstances, and the power of community to sustain individual resilience are experiences that transcend any particular battlefield. Modern military psychologists studying resilience and post-traumatic growth have found the Colditz experience, as captured in the film and the memoirs it inspired, particularly valuable. The creative adaptation to constraint, the repurposing of limited resources, and the maintenance of humor under duress all represent psychological strategies that have applications far beyond wartime captivity. What separates the Colditz story from mere entertainment is its commitment to these deeper truths. The film refuses easy heroism or simplistic patriotism, instead showing ordinary men responding to extraordinary circumstances with the full range of human reactions: fear, courage, pettiness, generosity, despair, and hope. By embracing this complexity, the film achieves something remarkable. It honors the real experiences of the Colditz prisoners, while speaking to universal aspects of human resilience. In this sense, watching the Colditz story today offers something more valuable than historical recreation. It provides a window into how humans maintain dignity and purpose under the most challenging conditions. a lesson that remains as relevant now as it was when the film was made. The Colditz story deserves to be viewed again with the awareness of what was really happening, both on screen and behind the camera. When you watch John Mills stride purposefully across the castle courtyard, you're seeing not just an actor playing a part, but a veteran who understood military bearing from lived experience. When Eric Portman delivers his terse assessments as Colonel Richmond, you're witnessing a man grappling with his own complex relationship to military service. The next time you view the film, notice how the camera lingers on hands, constantly in motion, mending, writing, creating. This wasn't merely a stylistic choice, but a deliberate effort to show how manual activity preserved sanity during long months of confinement. Watch for the subtle differences in how prisoners interact with guards of varying temperaments, another detail insisted upon by the real veterans who advised the production. Observe, too, the evolving psychology in the prisoners' faces as the film progresses, the gradual hardening, the calculated watchfulness, the measured assessment of risk. These weren't acting choices developed in isolation, but performances shaped by direct conversations with men who had lived the experience. The film's power lies in these accumulated authenticities, rather than in any single dramatic moment. Perhaps most importantly, recognize that what appears as restraint on screen, the film's refusal to indulge in melodrama or excessive action, actually represents its greatest integrity. By honoring the methodical reality of the Colditz experience, rather than inventing Hollywood heroics, the filmmakers created something that has outlasted flashier war pictures of its era. The real revelation of the Colditz story is that courage often looks different than cinema has taught us to expect. It can be found in patience as much as action, in community as much as individual heroism, in humor as much as solemnity. By capturing this more nuanced reality, the film offers not just entertainment, but genuine insight into human resilience. If you appreciate this window into a remarkable chapter of history, consider sharing this video with someone who might value its deeper truths. The story of Colditz deserves to be remembered not just as a daring escape narrative, but as a testament to the human capacity for adaptation, creativity, and hope in the face of seemingly insurmountable challenges. And if this exploration has changed how you see this classic film, let us know in the comments below. We'd love to hear which hidden details you notice on your next viewing.